At 6:41 a.m. on June 3, 2025, a US Marine Corps F-35B was flying southeast of the Miyako Strait on what was supposed to be a routine patrol over international waters. The jet had launched earlier that morning from an amphibious assault ship operating as part of a larger carrier strike group. The mission was straightforward, a wide-area surveillance run designed to demonstrate presence and monitor air traffic in the region. For the first 20 minutes, the skies were clear and everything appeared normal. Then the pilot's helmet alarm cut through the quiet. His systems flashed the warning that an enemy radar lock detected. The source was approaching from the northwest at medium altitude and high speed. His onboard computer analyzed the radar signature and matched it to a Chinese J-16D, the electronic warfare variant of the multi-role fighter. Not far behind, another track appeared, a KJ-500 airborne early warning aircraft, the type China relies on for surveillance and coordination. A third return came seconds later, a J-10C fighter, moving south to join the intercept. The Chinese were not hiding their intentions. The formation was deliberate, closing in fast. The pilot immediately lowered altitude, banking slightly left to break line of sight. His electronic warfare system automatically began analyzing the incoming signal and pushing out false returns. The F-35's stealth reduced his signature, but the lock tone in his ears didn't stop. The J-16D had burned through the defenses and was holding him firmly. He switched his radar into a low-power, narrow mode to avoid broadcasting his own position too strongly. The lock was reported to his wingman flying further south. The second F-35 acknowledged the contact but remained silent, using only passive sensors to track the Chinese formation. This gave the lead jet the responsibility of handling the threat directly while the second stayed hidden, prepared to strike if the situation escalated. The J-16D kept closing. The range dropped to 40 miles, then 35. The lock remained. The American began defensive maneuvers, adjusting heading and altitude in small increments to make the radar picture less stable. His weapons page showed AIM-120D AMRAAMs and AIM-9X sidewinders ready. But rules of engagement did not allow him to arm or fire without more than a radar lock. At 27 miles, he knew he was in real danger. The Chinese jet was within range to launch a PL-15 long-range missile. The J-16D began jamming heavily. F-35 system countered with deceptive signals, sending back false locations. It was a digital battle, each side trying to overwhelm the other's electronics. The lock tightened, the warning tone changed pitch, indicating the Chinese radar was in full fire control mode. The American pulled a harder turn, G-forces pressing against his body. He concentrated on his instruments, knowing that at this point a missile launch was entirely possible. While this played out in the air, the situation on the surface was also shifting. The carrier strike group was not alone. Several Chinese naval vessels had been shadowing the American force for days, and now they began to close the distance. A Type 055 Renhai-class cruiser altered course toward the amphibious assault ship that had launched the F-35s. At the same time, two Type 052D destroyers moved closer to the U.S. carrier itself. Their radars lit up, actively scanning, and their fire control systems came online. In simple terms, the Chinese ships were locking onto the American fleet in the same way the J-16D was locking onto the F-35. The American destroyers escorting the carrier responded immediately. Aegis radar systems switched from surveillance mode to full tracking. Electronic warfare suites activated. Pilots in the ready room aboard the carrier were scrambled toward their jets. What had begun as an isolated radar lock in the air was now expanding into a wider confrontation between two naval formations. The F-35 pilot could hear the updates from his ship. The strike group was raising its readiness level. Helicopters were being launched to monitor the Chinese vessels. Anti-submarine sensors were deployed in case a submarine was lurking nearby. The message was clear. The Americans would not be caught unprepared. Back in the air, the distance continued to shrink. At 25 miles, the J-16D was well within missile range. The American pilot prepared mentally for the sequence he would need to survive. He would release flares and chaff in bursts, use his jamming suite at maximum power, brake hard into any missile fired, and count on his wingman to strike the shooter. The second F-35 was still positioned well behind the J-16D, quiet but ready. At 6:44 a.m., the radar lock vanished. For several seconds, the cockpit was quiet. Then it returned, but in a different mode. The J-16D was cycling through its options, probing for weaknesses. The pilot made small heading changes and altitude adjustments, denying the Chinese an easy shot. The carrier strike group below reported that the Chinese surface ships were now within dangerous proximity. Leading the group was the Type 055 Renhai-class cruiser Lhasa, one of the most advanced warships in China's fleet. It was less than 15 nautical miles from the American amphibious assault ship, a range where its long-range YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles or surface-to-air missiles could strike almost any target in the formation within minutes. The Lhasa wasn't just another ship. It carried over 100 vertical launch cells, making it one of the most heavily armed surface combatants in the world. The Americans reacted immediately. The USS Shiloh, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers moved into position, forming a tight protective screen between the Lhasa and the carrier. Their Aegis combat systems locked onto the Chinese cruiser, tracking every movement. Dozens of missile tubes were ready to fire if the situation crossed the line. Then another warning came across the net. Sonar operators aboard the USS Spruance reported contact with a possible Chinese submarine in the area. The signature suggested a Type 093 nuclear-powered attack submarine, creeping close to the formation. For several minutes, the contact moved steadily toward the American carrier group, its location marked carefully on the combat system screens. Submarines represented an even more dangerous threat. With torpedoes and anti-ship missiles, a single one could cripple a major warship before anyone had time to respond. Anti-submarine helicopters, MH-60R Seahawks, were launched from the destroyers, dipping sonar buoys into the water and sweeping the area with active pings. The carrier strike group shifted formation slightly, widening the escort screen. But just as quickly as it appeared, the submarine contact faded from the sonar display. Whether it had gone deep, shut down its systems, or slipped out of detection range, no one knew for sure. Finally, the pressure began to ease. The KJ-500 airborne warning aircraft turned back east. The J-10C reduced speed and withdrew. The J-16D held its lock a moment longer, then banked north and began heading for home. On the surface, the Chinese cruiser and destroyers also turned away, gradually opening distance from the American strike group. The radar locks dropped. If a missile had been launched, the region could have been in open conflict within minutes. One PL-15 in the air would have triggered an American response, which in turn would have escalated into a naval clash. It was clear the Chinese had locked onto the F-35 and moved their ships close to the carrier on purpose because they wanted to push the Americans out of the area. But the decision in Washington was the opposite of what Beijing wanted. Instead of pulling back, the U.S. decided to increase its presence. A few days later, the USS Ronald Reagan moved into the region with its strike group. On board was Carrier Air Wing 5, made up of over 60 aircraft. That included FA-18E Super Hornets for strike and air defense missions, EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare, E-2D Hawkeyes for airborne command and control, and MH-60R Seahawk helicopters for anti-submarine patrols and search and rescue. The Reagan was escorted by Ticonderoga-class cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each carrying vertical launch cells loaded with missiles for air and missile defense. If you want to see more breakdowns like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for our next video.